Today we will take a look at the Soviet KV heavy tank line, named after the Soviet politician Kliment Voroshilov. We will talk about the tank's history, development, its predecessors, and also some about the successor of the KV line, the JS or IS series, named after Joseph Stalin. To see the origins of this tank line, we need to go back to the end of 1920s when the Soviet Union started to develop its tank force. In these early years, the Soviet tank designs were very much influenced by the Western tanks and designs, as their designers and industry were lagging behind. The interwar period of tank design was a time of experimenting for the industry, as no one really knew what will be the successful path after the land ships of World War I. The main principle was to have separate heavy and light tanks, where the big, often multi-turreted heavy tanks played the breakthrough role, and the lighter, faster tanks used for scouting or to exploit the breakthrough when it happens. This led to some interesting designs, like the giant Char 2C or the Char B1 with its two guns. Similarly to the M3 Lee tank, it had a 75mm howitzer in the hull and a 47mm secondary gun in the turret. I already have a short video on the Char 2C on the channel, you can find the link in the description. The British designed the multi-turreted A1E1 Independent, which never went into service with the British Army, but its concept was very interesting for other countries and was subject to espionage. Its plans ended up in Soviet hands and greatly influenced their tank design in the 1930s. The first of these Soviet designs were the T-28 medium tank, designed in 1931, and the T-35 heavy tank shortly after. They were both multi-turreted tanks, and if you put their pictures side by side, we can clearly see the influence the British Independent had on their design, especially on the T-35. The T-28 featured a 76mm low-velocity main gun and 4 or 5 machine guns in separate turrets. Its armor varied between 20 to 40mm, normal for an early 1930s design, but proved to be too thin by the time they saw action. The T-35 featured a 76mm main gun, 2 45mm secondary guns, and 5 to 6 machine guns in separate turrets. Its armor was not thicker than the T-28 medium tanks though. The T-35 was an obsolete design, following the interwar land battleship design principle. There was actually an even bigger, super heavy land battleship type tank drawn up, the T-42, which never made it further than the drawing board. It was planned to weigh 100 tons, featuring 90mm thick armor, a 107mm main gun, and several secondary guns and machine guns. Shortly after they came into service in the mid-1930s, their involvement in the Spanish Civil War already showed the need for more heavily armored tanks. Their armor was not strong enough to withstand the shells from the widely used 37mm anti-tank guns. They were used in the early years of World War II. The T-28s participated in the invasion of Poland and the Winter War with Finland, and their performance was disappointing. The work on their replacement was started even before the Second World War broke out, and with this we arrived to the KV tanks development. After the disappointing performance of the T-28 and T-35, plans to replace them were already in motion. In 1937, new directives were laid out for a new heavy tank design. The requirements called for armor plating strong enough to withstand a 76mm gun shell to up to 1200 meters, and the vehicle needs to be powered by a diesel engine. Initially the directive asked for a 5-turret design, similar to the T-35, but later this was reduced. The two initial designs for the new directives were the SMK and the T-100. Both featured very similar layouts, with a 76mm main gun and a secondary turret with a 45mm gun. They both had modern torsion bar suspension and wide tracks to support the weight of the tanks, which was necessary as they weighted 45 and 58 tons. Both designs were given the green light to build prototypes, and they were completed in May and August of 1939. Over the course of planning and testing, Kotyin, the lead designer of the SMK, continuously argued that they should build a single turret prototype, as in his view the multiple turrets didn't worth the increased weight and loss of mobility. In February 1939, without approval from his superiors, he set his team to design a single-turreted version of the SMK. The plans were shown to Stalin in August. They managed to get an approval to build one prototype to test together with the SMK and the T-100. And thanks to Kotyin's persistence, the KV tank was born. During the test, as expected, the lighter KV tank's mobility proved to be superior to its rivals. All three types were sent to participate in the Winter War against Finland in November. Where the KV performed well, it proved to be reliable and well defended against the anti-tank guns. The SMK and T-100 were not as effective. Though their armor was capable to withstand the enemy shells, they were too slow and heavy compared to the KV tank. In December 1939, the KV-1 was adopted for mass production. The tank featured 70 to 90 mm armor, making it invulnerable to existing anti-tank weapons other than point-blank range. It featured a 76 mm main cannon and 3 machine guns. The tank was powered by the same 12-cylinder V2 diesel engine as a T-34, making it relatively mobile and reliable. However, its clutch and transmission were outdated designs and made the tank very hard to drive. The KV-1 went through a series of further development over the years. They received a more powerful 600 horsepower engine from the original 500 horsepower, its armor thickness was increased, some models even more by bolting on additional 35 mm armor plates. Initially the KV-1 featured the L11 76 mm gun, while later versions received the F-32 higher velocity gun, and in 1941 the even more powerful ZIS-5 cannon. This was similar to the F-34 mounted on the T-34 medium tanks. Many different variants were developed on the KV chassis over its active service, so let's take a look at those. Maybe the most well-known variant is the bunker buster KV-2. During the Winter War in Finland, the Soviet army had difficulties against the concrete bunkers of the opposing side, so a heavy tank with a larger caliber cannon was requested. The actual design of the modification only took 2 weeks, as the chassis was unmodified and it used a readily available 152 mm howitzer. To house the big gun, a huge box-like turret was designed, which made the KV-2 almost 5 meters tall. Though the towering giant was an easy target, the turret was very well armored, with 110 mm thick armor on the front and 75 mm on the sides, which in the early stages of the war, similarly to the KV-1, made it almost impenetrable to the existing anti-tank guns the Germans used. The added weight on the other hand significantly reduced the tank's mobility, as the giant turret and heavy gun raised its weight by about 10 tons, which put a lot of strain on the unmodified drivetrain. The weight of the turret also made it almost impossible to traverse it if the tank was not on flat ground. It was a formidable and well-armored tank, but it lacked mobility. The KV-1's constant up-armoring during the war, and the added weight led to requests for a lighter version, which can keep up with the faster and more numerous T-34s. One attempted solution to this problem was the KV-1S, a lighter version with its armor reduced to 60 mm. As a result, the top speed was increased to 40 km an hour on road. An upgunned version of the KV-1S was the KV-85, a stopgap solution until the newer IS series of heavy tanks came into production. These featured the 85mm D5T gun in a new turret on the KV-1 chassis, the same gun that was mounted on the early T-34-85 tanks. This new 85mm gun could reliably penetrate the new Tiger tanks from a distance of 1000 meters. Another interesting vehicle was the Su-152 assault gun, built on the KV-1S chassis. This was a turretless, self-propelled gun featuring a 152mm howitzer. Developed in 1943, it was a fairly successful design, used in combat as direct fire support or as a mobile artillery piece. As the KV chassis production came to an end not long after the introduction of this vehicle, it was upgraded to use the new IS heavy tank chassis. And with this we arrive to the successor of the KV tanks, the IS series heavy tanks. The first tank of the IS series rolled off the line in October 1943. The IS-1 featured a new armored profile and turret, and also a revised transmission. It was considerably more mobile than the KV-1s. The 85mm gun-equipped IS-1's production only lasted about half a year though, as the experiments to upgun the Soviet heavy tanks were well underway. The tests with the D-25 122mm gun and the D-10 100mm gun were already started in 1943. The D-10 gun had more penetration, but the D-25 seemed like the better dual-purpose gun, and it was chosen to be mounted on the IS-2 models. After the IS-2 models with the 122mm gun entered mass production, the 85mm gun-equipped IS-1 production stopped, so all the 85mm guns could be directed to the T-34s. Tests showed that the IS-2's frontal armor could withstand shells from the German 75 or 88mm guns to ranges over 500-600 meters, and it can defeat the German tanks at that range as well. The IS-2 was the only Allied tank which had somewhat reliable armor protection against the German high-velocity guns mounted on the Tiger and Panther tanks. By the end of the war, the IS tank series reached a complete redesign in the form of the IS-3 tank. It's easy to identify by the so-called spike nose and the flat dome turret. These tanks arrived too late to participate in combat. Their first appearance was on the Berlin Victory Parade on 7th of September 1945. After its experimental combat trials in the Winter War in Finland, the next time KVs seen action was in 1941 when Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Because of the slow production, by that time their numbers were still very low, around 500 units were combat ready. They first met the advancing German troops on 23rd of June 1941 at Rasegne, and they had a huge effect on the German morale. After first encountering the old T-26 and BT light tanks, the appearance of the giant, almost impenetrable KVs was a shock to the German troops. The Wehrmacht had more than 3,000 tanks, but only a fraction of them were Panzer IIIs and IVs with 50 or 75mm guns, and even those were only effective at very close ranges against the KVs. The most numerous Panzer 38T light tanks and the 37 and 50mm anti-tank guns were ineffective against the well-armored heavy tanks. The KVs destroyed many German anti-tank guns by simply driving over them. On the next day, a single KV-1 managed to hold off the advance of the 6th Panzer Division for a whole day. Despite fire death from 37 and 50mm anti-tank guns and even from an 88mm, the KV-1 kept fighting until its ammo ran out, and finally, advancing infantry managed to finish it off with hand grenades. The KV tanks also suffered heavy losses though. Many broke down or simply ran out of fuel, many were flanked and destroyed from the rear, and because their numbers were low from the start, in the next few months most of them were lost, but their effect on the Germans was a lasting one. Their production resumed after the relocation of the Soviet war industry. The KV tanks participated in the defense of Moscow, at Stalingrad, and in every major operation through 1942-1943. Their technical issues and their relatively low numbers compared to the many T-34s produced slowly made them obsolete, as they were too slow, heavy, and their armament wasn't better than the T-34s. They were relegated to secondary roles, used as infantry support against fortified positions, and by the end of 1943 their production ended when the IS series took over. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.